Hello, everyone. Good to
We're
peace.
gonna,
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
sorry, Zach.
Oh,
We're
you're
gonna
good.
get started in a few. As you're joining, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We have a little bit of a introduction here on the first page. Let us know your title, your org, and where you're joining from.
Yes, it was good to see a lot of names, familiar names on the attendee list, a lot of new names on the attendee list as well. So thanks everyone again for attending, and we'll get started shortly. Yeah, would love to know who's in the room. Thanks, Reve, Director of Talent. Nice. Hello. Hello, Alyssa. Leslie. Leslie, I used to work for Dream. We can connect about that. Oh, this is great. Thanks, everyone. This is awesome. Harlem Lacrosse in the house. Worked with them a little bit. That's awesome. Mastery, I know we've worked with them, have some former coworkers there as well. Awesome. Thanks for joining, everyone. Probably wait one more minute. Ennis, hello, Candice, Shandell, Joel, hello, Kim, Helen. Nice to see you. Awesome. Joanna, anything else before we get started?
Yeah, let's just dive in a little bit. Hi everyone, my name is Joanna. My pronouns are she, her, and I am on the marketing team here at Agility. I will be your webinar support today. So just to go over a little technical information before we dive in. We will have some time for participation at the end of the webinar, but throughout the webinar, please feel free to add any questions that you might have either in the chat or the Q&A section, and we'll grab those questions and circle back to them at the end if Zach doesn't answer them in real time. Um, Other times during the webinar, we'll ask for you to add comments or use the chat and raise your hand button on their screen to come off mute and participate vocally. Excuse me, there will be a recording of this and we'll send you an email with some resources as well, probably tomorrow. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to our host, Agility's Senior Consultant of Sourcing, Zachary Har. Zach?
Thanks, Joanna. I appreciate it. Everyone in the chat, everyone attending so far, thanks for joining us today. This is my second time doing this webinar. Very excited to do it again. Just to go over LinkedIn Recruiter. I know a lot of us use it, depend on it throughout our work and our jobs. And this is a good refresher. We're not going to get in every single details today, but my goal is definitely to go through the material that I have planned today. I'll go through a little bit of an agenda and hopefully monitor the chat as well, like Joanna said, answer a lot of questions near the end. My goal is definitely to leave a lot of time near the end for open-ended questions as well. I do want to say, like, come as you are today, video on, video off. I know probably it's lunchtime for a lot of folks during this hour, so free to eat, drink, during your time during this webinar. I want it to be very comfortable for, everyone who's in attendance. So that's a big goal of mine. But first, just wanted to go over kind of who I am. I went to Pitt and NYU. You can probably see that also from the flags behind me. No secret there. But I was a TFA core member with Oklahoma City Public Schools after college. Taught middle school math, was a lot of fun. I see some folks from Dream and Uncommon Schools in the house today. I previously worked there. At both of those spots, that was where I started kind of my recruitment journey, hiring a lot of teachers, a lot of home office staff, a lot of school leaders. And then since 2019, have been with Agility in a few different capacities, but now focusing on both still search work and then also a lot of sourcing operations work. That QR code is to my LinkedIn. I love to stay connected with folks on LinkedIn. So if you want to scan that, we'll also send it out later. But more than happy, thanks, Leslie. That's awesome. To connect with you informally or more formally about how to support this work. This is only an hour today, so we're probably going to leave today still with some questions. I'm more than happy to connect with you, online, offline, whatever makes sense to help out in this work. I want to be a resource for you. A little bit about just like who Agility is, who we are as an organization. We really work to place equity-minded leaders, across equity-centered systems that will, measure, hopefully impact over time, make consistent improvements that will then close wage gaps, close opportunity gaps, and really help you build a leadership bench that is truly reflective of the leaders we serve. That's a lot of, the search work, but we also, through our services that you'll see here on this next slide, do a lot of work, not only just in search on that blue side, but in the red and black, also like focusing on compensation design. We know that counts in this work as well, just as much as anything. Also offer like equity assessments for your organization to kind of understand where you're at, in terms of competency models and performance management, and also just like implementation support throughout all of that as well. So while I focus mainly my role more so on the search side of things, we also have some fantastic colleagues and team members focusing on compensation work as well as equity assessments, if you're curious about that. Just if you're curious, like Helen, I know you're in the conversation. I had the opportunity to work with One Goal recently, have worked with some really cool organizations, Foundation Academies. I think I saw some folks from FA on the list as well, just helping, folks find leaders. And it's really something that we love doing and helping and supporting. And I think you'll learn in this webinar that there's no one right way to do this, right? So, I'm excited to know that there are a variety of organizations we work with who need this support. And it's truly a team effort, and I'm excited to, kind of continue to do it. So just wanted to shout out some of our recent placements and recent colleagues and clients that we've worked with, which have been really, really fun. All right, today, what are we here for, right? So there is a Zoom chat question that you're going to see come in the chat, but just curious, like on a scale from 1 to 10, what is your familiarity using LinkedIn Recruiter, right? While folks respond to that, I think, what will we cover today? Aligning on candidate profile, right? You want to probably do that before you get into LinkedIn. Thinking through some LinkedIn expectations, also understanding like, how do we find talent, but also how do we message and respond to talent? That's also a piece. See a lot of 7s, 8s, some 4s, which is good too. 6, only scratching the surface. 3, 7, awesome. So there's a good variety so far. And then also just going over some like overall sourcing tips and tricks. Really excited about that work. And then also just like a general Q&A. I want to leave time. Ahmed, I see you're a 0. Thanks for your honesty. I was at a 0 at 1.2. Hopefully today you feel a little bit more confident, but more than happy to connect, moving past this conversation too, to hopefully build your confidence. It's a pretty intuitive system. It's just like anything, you need practice. You need at bats at it, right? So hopefully, Ahmed, you get some time with that after this. All right, so what do we do? Let's jump in. What do we do before we before we log in, rather? What we do here at Agility, we have a discovery process. Basically, these are formal, informal interviews with really key stakeholders to really understand what are the key competencies, what are the key priorities, the kind of key non-negotiables that really help you understand not only just how to talk about the role when you talk with it, to candidates or when you're messaging folks, but also it informs your job descriptions, it informs your candidate rubrics, basically everything you're using early on in a search to really understand, what do we need to do when we're looking for this role? And I understand, right? Not everyone also has the capacity always to have this kind of formal process, but you can also just do this through a survey, right? Put together a Google Form survey to send out to these key stakeholders so that when you're doing your sourcing, you know what you're really looking for, so you're not wasting time, when you're sending out your messages initially. So we really anchor that to our process overall. And then we also basically use that learning to then inform our sourcing practice, right? So I'm using that information of thinking at job titles, location, years of experience, skills. I'm using all that information prior to help me inform my own LinkedIn. And then I think the next slide here goes over a little bit about data. I would say, let me squeeze here. We recognize that job postings aren't enough, right? It's really kind of the onus is on us as recruiters to really understand how can we have a targeted approach to find top talent. So I just pulled some data to show, like, out of the 60 searches that I've done as just a part of my time at Agility, and I would bet that it's probably very similar to my time at Uncommon and similar at Dream as well, when I was doing some teacher recruitment and school leadership recruitment. It's over 80% of placements that we're sourcing. We're finding these folks who are interested in these roles. Of course, we're always going to get some placements and searches that result in hires from job postings too. We post on LinkedIn, we post on some different job boards, but really we're finding that a lot of our searches, when we're finding our hires at the end of the search, they're from us sending messages, sending out connection messages, whether that's on LinkedIn Recruiter or even on just LinkedIn Basic, right? You can still send connection requests. You can still send notes, even if you don't have Recruiter. But we're finding that, we're finding these placements. They're not finding our roles because there are so many options out there. You really need to think about how you can find these top talent. Yes, absolutely, Helen. I agree with you there. So when I think about just like some expectations of LinkedIn Recruiter, I really think about, like, I'm the matchmaker in this process, right? And again, not every match is going to work out on the end, right? And don't be discouraged if folks don't respond. We'll go over some data in a few minutes, but most people actually won't respond to you. Like, a good response rate for a lot of these messages are like 15 to 20%. So that means 4 out of 5 times people are going to ignore you, which is okay. Like, that is an expectation of this process. I like to sometimes pretend I'm the ideal candidate, right? If I was an executive director, or if I was a teacher, what would be the things that I'm putting in my LinkedIn profile, right? What are the skills that I would be highlighting? And that's what I then use toward my filters moving forward. And these next like 4 or 5 slides, we're going to go through a lot of the filters that I use to find this talent, right? Know that the data that you input is only as good as the data included by the user on LinkedIn. And what I mean by that is you don't want to be hyper specific, because some LinkedIn profiles, they might only have job titles. They may only have, organizations. They might not have skill sets. They might not have, that specificity in their LinkedIn profile to say, hey, I'm a great fundraiser. But instead, they may just say, I'm a director of fundraising. Like, they don't have, the specificity in their LinkedIn. So sometimes you actually want to paint with a broad brush on your LinkedIn filters, which we'll go over in a few minutes. This is like the biggest lesson that I've learned over time is, like, there is not one right way to do this, right? I think if someone's telling you, like, hey, I have the solution, they're probably lying, because what works for me last week probably doesn't work for me today, because so many things are changing, right? You have to prepare to be iterative when you're thinking about Boolean search terms and your filters, because so much of how people are representing themselves on LinkedIn changes, right? So what could have worked for me last week maybe doesn't work for me anymore. I also want to think about not just reaching out to candidates, but also connectors, right? I think so much of our work, we ideally only look at finding the candidate rather than looking at someone who has a wide network and a wide circle that can help you find that candidate. So oftentimes, I'm not just reaching out to folks who I think can take on the role. I'm reaching out to 2 or 3 levels above that and saying, hey, I know a lot of people. Can you help me out on this search too? So think about that as well in that split. I would say I probably reach out 80% to candidates and about 20% to connectors for a lot of my searches that I do. And again, what worked yesterday probably won't work today, and that's okay, because we're so iterative, through this process. So wanted to just share that. And then going to the filters, I'm monitoring the chat too. I don't want to lose that. So Emily, I see your question. I'll probably address that a little bit later. Let's start with filters, right? When I think about my filters, this is usually where I start with job titles. So you're going to see two different options here, right? The first one, let's say we're looking for a chief financial officer. I'm going to put in very different iterations of what a title could be for a chief financial officer. I could write it all out. I could just say CFO. I could even just say director of finance. I can even just keep it very, very broad and just say finance and see what pops up. Similarly, I could also do that when I'm looking for a teacher, right? So you see that on the right. I could say a middle school math teacher. Maybe that's how someone says their title is. They write the whole words out, every single word. Or they could say six, the number six, TH, or they spell out the word six, right? There are so many different iterations of job titles out there. You have to think like, what are all possible iterations that someone could say, hey, I'm a sixth grade math teacher, including I was a pre-algebra teacher. If I put the word pre-algebra in there, that would put out my profile because that's how I said my title as a pre-algebra teacher. I didn't say I was a seventh grade teacher. I said I was a pre-algebra teacher, right? So you have to kind of plan out how specific and then also how broad you can be because those are going to be able to get you different results, right? Emily, I'm looking at your question now. That is something that absolutely happens, determining on your response rate. We can connect one-on-one about that for sure. And then the only other thing I'll mention about job titles here is that sometimes here where you see including current or past titles, I'll play around sometimes with that, but I'll be honest with job titles. That is something that I usually in my searches want them currently to have that title. I don't want them previously to be a sixth grade teacher because that means maybe they left education altogether. Maybe they've left teaching, right? And if I'm looking for a teacher, that's who I want. I want someone who's already a teacher or someone maybe a teacher and an assistant, right? Someone who can grow to that role. So again, I can sometimes play around with this include tab, but more than likely when I'm looking at job titles, I want them to currently be that teacher. I'll show you in some other filters and actually in the next one, in the next few that also change within current and past too. So the next one on here is location. I like to play around with this one too. That's again a theme, very iterative. I can see New York three different ways here, right? So New York, United States, that's the entire state of New York. So if you're in New York City, that's also going to include Albany and upstate New York and everything else. If I want the specific city, New York, New York, that means something different to LinkedIn. Or I can say I want the metropolitan area, which includes some of New Jersey, Connecticut, includes the wider kind of New York City population. All three of those things separately will get you different results. And so I want you to know that. Don't just put the specific city in there because if someone's in Newark, right? But they might be open to work in New York, then if you don't put Newark, right? You only put New York, New York, you're not. Okay. This is an area where I do like to include open to relocate because I know for a lot of our jobs, especially as we are more in a remote culture, people might be more flexible depending on where they live, or they might be looking to make a shift, post-COVID to a new location. So I'll probably start just including current just to see what happens. Ennis, thank you for that. Metro areas define 60-mile radius. So that, yes, expands that radius for you. Thank you, Ennis. Open to relocate will also get you folks across the country who might be open to relocating in your area. So definitely do that as well as a second iteration. Okay, so this is an example of companies. This is a filter where I do use current or past. And so all of these companies that I have listed here on the left is my background, basically. Teach for America, Uncommon Schools, Dream, Oklahoma City Public Schools, Agility Consulting, and a charter school. So you can see, like, you could get very specific, or at the end there where I just say charter school, that could potentially also bring up my profile as well because I mentioned charter schools in my profile, right? So you don't always have to be hyper specific here. Like if you forgot agility was actually agility consulting, but you just remembered the first word, you can absolutely just put agility on there and I will still show up in the results, right? You might forget uncommon schools has schools on the end, but you just put uncommon, that will still show up. And I think one thing that I like to highlight on this tab too is it's okay if they previously worked for these organizations too, because in my mind, if they previously worked for these organizations, they're probably, if they did move, are at other aligned organizations that I might not even be aware of. So when I say past, they could be at a whole new organization, let's say, Ascend Schools that maybe I wasn't aware of previously, but then I can then use that, put that back into my company filters and get whole new results, right? So it's also saying like, I want them previously to be working for these companies, and now I want to see where they're working now, and that'll give me new ideas of new companies that might be aligned, whether those are similar nonprofits or schools, or maybe even for-profit companies that I wasn't aware of. Those will give me new ideas too, to inform my sourcing moving forward. Are there any limitations? I'm looking at the chat here on how many messages or contacts I can make monthly. That depends on your agreement with LinkedIn. So that's a separate question with LinkedIn, just based on how your contract is set up. So that would basically be, whatever your budget is, Ahmed. If I'm moving on here, so this is identifying talent through industry and keywords. So I do have some thoughts on these two filters specifically. I will say industry can be helpful to narrow down a search if you still have too many to browse through. I will say on average, I'm usually looking for my results to be anywhere from like 100 to 150. If you're not familiar, LinkedIn allows you to see 25 profiles at a time. So if I'm seeing 100 or 150 profiles, that's about 4 to 6 pages. I feel like that's pretty manageable to go through. But if you're finding that your results are in the thousands, like that's not manageable. Your capacity, you have so many tasks probably, you have so many different things that you have to manage as a part of your job. I want that results number to probably be somewhere closer to 100, or a little bit more than that, because you want to be able to manage that properly. So industry is another way in which you can narrow down that number. But I believe, and someone can correct me in the chat, I believe the industry is sometimes selected by the user too. So if you are using industry as a filter, I like to use that later on the process, because sometimes if I'm a sixth grade teacher for 5 years and I moved into leadership, but I didn't select by industry on LinkedIn, I might not show up in the results because now you're looking at industry as a part of your filter. So know that, and note that sometimes industry I like to use later on the process. I'm really trying to find people because I don't want to exclude anyone. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes that does happen. Again, it's only good as the data that users put into their profile. So you don't want to narrow down your search too much, because that will sometimes exclude people if they haven't identified that for themselves. The second thing that I have here is keywords. Keywords are super, super helpful because it scans the entire profile. So, on LinkedIn, some people have kind of bios or mission statements that are at the top of their profile. If they're talking about equity, I want to know about it. Or if they're talking about inclusion, I want to know about it. So I'll throw those keywords into the filter as well. And that is a little bit more specific to personal mission statements, or maybe they've included an equity statement as a part of their job bullets description underneath their titles. And so I want to scan the entire profile for things like equity, inclusion. If they're talking about diversity and representation, I'll add that to those keywords too. And I think that about section where people are talking about who they are, which we love to read, the keywords is where that's going to scan it from. So if you have a whole list, you put in all your filters, your title, your company, your location, and you get a pretty wide list. But you also want to see if they're talking about equity, if they're posting about equity, or whatever it may be, that is a core competency for your organization. You can put that in the keyword and it will scan their entire profile. I will also say the keywords, you can get hyper specific, right, in terms of Boolean tools. So you can look at that example in the bottom there, equity or inclusion or charter or math, that anyone who has any of those keywords, you can add that to your list, and that'll just give you a more targeted and narrow list to choose from as well. Spotlights. Okay, so this is a tab, like this is actually where I start. Ennis, absolutely. If you're having profiles and searches that you need the candidates to be bilingual, languages is super important there. Yes, so absolutely. That is a great tip, Ennis. Thank you for highlighting that. Spotlights is honestly kind of sometimes where I start. We have a LinkedIn rep that we work with, and we meet with them a few times a year, and we actually just met with them, and we saw in our own data, if we messaged people who were open to work or were active talent or were interested in our company, we saw an increase of 85% of messages responded to. So I would bet it might not be that high of a number for other organizations, but I bet it's pretty close, if not more, for other organizations. I think we do a really intentional job. Shout out our marketing team. Dane's on our call here. Joanna's close to that work as well. We do a really solid intentional work at growing our audience on LinkedIn. So that's why I think Agility, we're close to about 30,000 followers right now. I would say if you're not, as an organization, posting regularly, and it can be about anything. It could be, organizational updates or shouting out your employees. If your employees aren't also resharing and posting those company posts, your audience isn't going to grow, because if they're not liking your content, they're not going to be engaged, right? They're not going to know what not only is Agility posting about, but what Zach's then resharing, right? That expands their audience. So I would say a big push for your organization, if you're struggling in that area, just start slow, right? Start posting regularly, maybe once a week, and then have your employees be resharing and adding a sentence when they do reshare that, so that they see the connection to your company page, and then your organization's audience can grow as well. So that when you do have those hard to need or hard to fill searches that come across, people will already be aware because they saw you reshared your company post, and then they liked your company page, and they just have a lot more, I think, familiarity with your organization when you are looking for hard to fill jobs, right? There's actually one thing I forgot to highlight. I want to say in the equity piece, I saw a lot of the questions on the early registration link for this webinar. A lot of the questions is, how do I just find more representative talent of our community that we're serving, and how do we diversify our pipelines? I think this is obviously work that you can do some of that, but I will also say sometimes you have to look internally and say, how accessible is our application, right? I like to brag in our early conversations, our application is one of the easiest and quickest out there, and that's on purpose, right? We don't want to have a barrier to entry for anyone to access our jobs. So that means we're not having you manually fill out a resume after you've already uploaded it. We're making cover letters optional. We have quick application questions, that just, confirm alignment to salary and timeline. We're posting our salaries. I know that's mandatory in some states now, but if it's not, I would strongly suggest you to start just getting salaries out there earlier. And that will also help you, I think, diversify your pipeline and your sourcing. When that information, when you're sending messages, which we'll get into a little bit later, that information is already transparent and aware of from the candidate before they even apply. So that has been extremely helpful for us, just to be transparent, because we know if the salary isn't posted, or if it's not transparent, these like key details, that negotiation at the end heavily favors white men in that process, which is including a lot of bias, which is not helping women of color, in your pipelines. I think we are very intentional about that. So I wanted to say, yes, sourcing and LinkedIn Recruiter, that's part of the puzzle. But I think a lot of the other pieces that we like to talk about too is just how accessible is your application too, and that will help. All right. So let's say, question for the chat. I know I've been talking a lot. So I appreciate that. Rediscovered. I saw a quick question there before I get into that. Rediscovered candidates. Oops, I'm moving way too much forward. Hold on one second. Rediscovered candidates. That's basically candidates who are previously maybe already added to a project that you then are adding to a second project. So kind of like your frequent flyers, if you will, that you're trying to engage in multiple ways over the years, and they may then show up again as a part of a new project now that you're working on it. So those are folks that you've already engaged with, maybe already that your company has messaged, because when I have a seat with Agility, I can also see what my colleagues are doing on LinkedIn Recruiter as well, to kind of see a historical perspective of how many messages have we sent. Have they accepted them? Have they declined them? So that's where that rediscovered candidates comes in, Ennis. All right. I know, like I said, I've been talking a lot, which is probably the purpose of a webinar like this, but I wanted to include another chat question. Just like, what are some of your go-to filters? Again, there's not one right way to do this, and there are probably a lot of tips and tricks that you all have if you want to share that in the chat as well. As folks potentially add in what they're using on LinkedIn and some of your go-to filters. I will say, some of the other ones that I sometimes use is education. If I specifically want to do some recruitment with HBCUs, I'll include that. But I will say, yes, we said it exactly the same time. Awesome. That's perfect. So that is something that I will do. But other than that, like, I'm really not caring where someone goes to school, which might be a hot take, but like, that is not a true predictor of success in my mind. It's good to get representative talent, I think, but in terms of like whether they went to an Ivy League school or a community college, like, I think of that the same, honestly. I will say sometimes skills and assessments I'll use. Often that's, again, only as good as what the users include. So if I'm someone on LinkedIn and I'm a fundraiser, let's say, and I say I'm good at pitches, or I'm good at grants, right? I, as a user, have to say I'm good at grants, right? And so if you're looking for that, know it's only as good as the amount that people are using. Or inputting into LinkedIn, right? So I don't use that all the time. Sometimes seniority is helpful. Sometimes it's not, I'll be honest. But degrees, again, I'll only use that for more like certifications. There have been some searches recently that I've needed like a CPA for an accountant role, or a SHRM certification for an HR role. So sometimes those degrees and certifications are helpful there, but I'm not necessarily saying that someone needs to have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. Those are a little bit more antiquated, I will say. I see a question. How do you stay organized and follow up with potential candidates who may not be as responsive? Yes, absolutely. I'll touch on that a little bit. There's a few slides that I'll mention on here about messaging talent. So I hope to approach that for you. And if not, we can definitely connect offline as well. Perfect. Timing here for messaging talent, so I'll be able to address it right now. I will say, what do you look for in a good message? That's another chat question that I am curious about, thinking about, because there is, again, not one right way. I think probably the only universal feeling that we have about messages on our end is that don't make them long. Don't make them an essay, because folks are getting messages all the time, right? Folks are smart. Folks know what they're looking for, right? So you want to include key information like salary, as I mentioned, or location. If it's remote, is it hybrid, right? Those are probably going to get more responses, as those types of roles are more, popular right now. I obviously know that's not the case with school-based roles, but if there are some location, features, definitely highlight that. You probably want to mention the website in some way, or the job description that you can attach. So rather than copying, paragraphs from the job description in the message, just put the link in there. Yeah, Michael, I agree. Like, you can link to the JD, or you can actually download it as a PDF and attach it to your messages too. That's an option if you'd like to do that. Again, I would say around 500 characters or less. We actually just got data, again, from our LinkedIn representatives that said when our messages were 300 or less, which is really short, our increase in responses went up about 60%. So short and to the point, Michael, yes, absolutely. I totally agree. What's the difference between degrees and fields of study on LinkedIn? I don't know. That's a good question. I would think about that, Krista. My assumption off the bat is degrees are going to be like whether or not you have a bachelor's or a master's or a doctorate, so like level, and then fields of study is going to be like actual maybe majors or topic areas. That's my assumption, but I can follow up on that. Um, be sure to edit the title, especially if you use the AI function. Yes, a title I've been seeing lately is "You deserve a rewarding." Yes, yes. So AI, there is a messaging system in LinkedIn now that utilizes AI. I'm like a little hesitant of that because I always want to be in control of my messages, right? So again, if you are using something like that, Nicole, and like you say as a tip, like make sure you look at it, right? And make sure you kind of edit it, as you see fit, because you don't want to make any mistakes or typos. And then also like be flexible with wording and subject line, right? So I like to sometimes highlight like remote role in the subject because that's probably the most important thing right now. Or maybe I'll highlight location, and you can do some like A/B testing. If you have 50 people in a project, right? Send 25 people your first iteration of a message, and then send the second 25 a different iteration that's probably similar, but you've changed one or two things. And then see about what response rates are you getting. Learn from your messages and learn from who's accepting, who's declining. Right? So you can learn from your response rates. Good question, Krista. I'm going to get in that in my next slide, probably. Yes. So acknowledge, I would say, both accepted and declined messages. So in LinkedIn Recruiter, you pay, right, for every message you send. Okay. That's a fact. You get that credit back if they respond, whether they're interested or not, right? Whether they've accepted it or declined it, right? So my goal is just like, one, if they've accepted it, my goal is to move them away from LinkedIn as soon as possible. All right. Which is kind of probably contradictory to this whole webinar, but like I want them either on the phone or on a Zoom call for a quick intro call because, like I said earlier, our application is one of the easiest applications out there. So I feel confident now because I've been doing this for years that like if I can get you on the phone and off of LinkedIn, I can get you to apply because in that call, I'm highlighting all the cool stuff that I learned in the discovery process. I'm telling them about salary. I'm telling them about their process, right? That's going to take them from application to offer. I'm giving them a timeline. And I'm also saying like, we don't need a cover letter. We just need a resume. Like you can put a cover letter if you want, but it's not necessary, right? And so I want to move them away. So I think, Chris, your question where it's like do you find it's better in terms of response rate to push folks to apply? I would say offering a call probably works a little bit better because depending on your application, I think candidates really enjoy that initial touch point. And when I'm saying like a cultivation call, it's like 10 to 15 minutes max. It's not a formal interview. You're not peppering them with questions. It's really for them to get more context about the role, about the process. So I feel like when I put my Calendly link in a message, that's what's going to get folks to respond. At least that's the anecdotal data that I have. Also, good people know good people, right? You don't have to just think about candidates in this job, like sourcing messaging pilot. Like you can think about like who are the chiefs or who are the like leaders of organizations that you know that will also inform them about candidates who might be interested in your teacher role or in your senior manager role, whatever it may be. So don't just think about messaging candidates. Also think about messaging referrals or network leaders that also know people that aren't in your circle, that aren't in your network, right? You always want to expand that. In what ways do you differentiate a discovery call from a phone screen? Yes, Morale. I will definitely go over that a little bit more. If I don't run into time limit here, we can connect offline for sure as well. LinkedIn Recruiter mobile app. I know some people don't like to bring work life to their mobile phone, which I am one of them, but it's an option. So I just wanted to highlight if that's someone that you prefer mobile over internet, it's out there. I will say sometimes you want to keep work and personal life separate, and I totally understand that too. Other just quick like tips and tricks. So advanced filters, I like to do this if you're finding that you're finding the same talent overall over and over and over. There's a recruiting activity filter where you can say, I want people without a message, right? That my team or myself, we haven't sent them a message in the past 3 months, right? So that will automatically exclude those folks if they've had a message or if they've had a tag that you've put on, or if you've added them to a project in the last 3 months. And I think, excuse me, that date range can change within like weeks or months or even a year. So I will say this is a good tool to use if you're finding that you're seeing the same talent over and over again. Definitely take advantage of this for sure. I will say also be aware of like previous messaging history, right? So this is an example of a profile that I found where I've seen like, yes, they're open to work. That's a good sign. They've held 8 roles at their company, which is like incredible tenure, right? They're a company follower, right? That's good. I have like 43 connections with them. So they're aligned probably in the same circles that I am. And they're actually in Workable, which is our applicant tracking system. So like all of those are like key data pieces because we have integrations set within LinkedIn. But I will say, look at activity here, right? So you can see that we've already sent them historically 3 messages and they're already in 3 projects, right? So if I hover over that, it'll show you whether they've accepted or declined or the message is still pending. So if we've sent them 3 messages in the last 6 months and I'm about to maybe send them a 4th message, that probably doesn't make sense because they haven't responded to other ones, or maybe they've already told us that, hey, enough with the messages already. I'm not looking, right? You don't want to just mass message everyone. You do want to be a little bit more targeted around what is the history with these candidates and profiles in LinkedIn? Because again, you're paying for every single message. So that's in my mind not a message we're sending because they're not going to respond or they're not interested in our roles. So use these key data pieces as like factors of whether or not you actually want to send the message to them. Something another trick. What if I don't have LinkedIn Recruiter, right? You're not the work doesn't stop just because you might not have the recruiter version, right? You can still message, and for free when you're sending connection requests, you can add a note. And I think you have a certain amount of characters that you can add. Yes, it's only one-on-one, but you can be customizable. I think I saw a note in the chat earlier where it's like you want to have personal kind of notes, because sometimes mass messaging is like the least personal thing ever, right? So that is one way you can be a little bit more customizable when saying like, hey, I saw your experience here, which is why I'm emailing you or messaging you to see if you're interested in this, C-suite role that I'm looking for and this teacher role that I'm looking for. Utilize LinkedIn groups and referrals. There are a ton of LinkedIn groups and referrals. I will also just say, like, if you're active on LinkedIn, like a lot of the folks who are in the chat and who signed up for this list, I've just seen your post on LinkedIn, and that is more like familiar with me when I see your post where I'm like, oh, I know that person because they always talk about the cool things that are happening about their organization. And I feel like if you're more active just on LinkedIn, you have a picture, your role's updated, and you're just more active as a poster on LinkedIn, or you're resharing your company's posts. Like, I think folks will be more apt to respond to you because they see you as an active kind of participant on the LinkedIn community overall. I would say just like, yes, again, share your company's posts. And then there's also a few different listservs that are talent specific, that often folks are sharing a lot of different job opportunities or just are brainstorming talent topics overall. So if you're not a part of these listservs, let me know. Email me after this. My email and my contact information will be a part of the follow-up message from this webinar. If you're not a part of these groups, they're just really, I think, good spaces to be a part of. Fair warning, you'll receive a lot of emails, and some people reply all the time, which I'm definitely guilty of many times. But again, it's a really good, solid resource, especially as a lot of us are in remote settings and we don't have that community, or we don't have that coworker group around you. It's a good listserv to be a part of. I think I'm nearing the end here. So yes, Q&A. Before we get to Q&A, I see some questions in there. Stacy, clarifying question. Do you prefer to include your Calendly link in your initial message to encourage cultivation calls? Yes. So I will, especially if I'm like really interested in learning about, a candidate more. I will say there are times when I want to control my calendar again. So I'll say like, are you interested in a, next step? Or are you interested in scheduling a call with me? Just to kind of prompt a response, right? So I will say I definitely include my Calendly link, but there's definitely sometimes too where, you know, I will not include that purposely because I want to own my calendar a little bit better. And I'll just say like, when are you available, right? You have to have some kind of action step to get them to reply for sure. Just quick next steps before we get into the overall Q&A. Just a reminder, the work that we do, compensation work, executive search work. If you're curious to learn more, hit me up. Or if you're just curious with questions about how to be a better sourcer for talent, let me know, and I'm more than happy to informally connect with you. All right, Joanna, I think this is the part where I stop talking and we take on some questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand in Zoom, and we're more than happy to unmute you if you want to talk about it, or if you want to add more questions in the chat. We're open to either option. And thanks so much for all the participation so far. I really appreciate it. Ahmed, you can just reach out. My contact information will be in the follow-up, so feel free to just send me some messages. I'm more than happy to support. And also, like, add me on LinkedIn. I would love to add you all on LinkedIn. I will probably do that afterwards anyway, but feel free to look me up on LinkedIn, and I would love to connect with you all more as well. Appreciate everyone attending, but more than happy if anyone has any questions, giving you some time back. All right, I see some questions. Oh, perfect. Krista, do you use the open to work part-time filters, or is that duplicative of using the spotlight tabs? So I definitely use the open to work. I think that's going to be the same thing. So I don't think you have to worry about being like repetitive there. I have never used the part-time. I honestly, it's been a while since I've looked at some part-time searches. So I actually didn't even know that that was an option. So I know remote is also an option, but I didn't know part-time was. So I haven't used them myself, but I'm sure it'd be really helpful. Gotcha. It's new. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Helen, I'm curious if there's a type of role, function, seniority, etc., that does better in LinkedIn Recruiter than others. We've noticed that more senior levels are easier to find on LinkedIn. I agree. I agree because I think the longer that you've been in your career, Helen, you have more, titles on there. You have more organizations. You just have more data for people to kind of pull from LinkedIn Recruiter from. It's probably a little bit more difficult if someone's only had one or two roles because there just isn't that much data then to pull from. So I would agree, Helen, a lot of our roles too are in that, kind of senior leader executive space. I will say when we're doing teacher searches, those are the most difficult, right? Or when I'm doing school leader searches, like those are always going to be the most difficult ones for sure. Ennis, thank you very much. Do you happen to have a session like this for other platforms like Indeed? We don't right now, Ennis, but that is definitely something that we'd be open to. We don't have any plans on doing that now, but I mean, we use a lot of similar systems like LinkedIn. We're actually trying to figure out how to be a little bit less dependent on LinkedIn, if we're being honest, just to see like how to find folks, because not 100% of people are on LinkedIn, right? So, I think the idea is like, how do we find people who aren't on LinkedIn? And we're struggling with that right now because LinkedIn has such a dominance in the market, right? So there's like some AI systems we're exploring, and Indeed, direct service roles coordinator. Yes, absolutely, Michael. So yeah, quick question or quick answer, Ennis. We don't have a specific webinar for that, but could in the future for sure. And Joanna makes a good point. Please take our survey. I would love if you all could take our survey. You can either click that link. The QR code is also on the screen there. And then my contact information. Seriously, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to kind of go over things. Or if you're curious about, our executive search or compensation work too for your organization, more than happy to have very, very informal conversations about that as well. So hopefully you all got some tips and tricks, realizing this is only an hour, so it's a very quick conversation, but hopefully folks were able to learn some stuff today. And happy to also take more questions too. Thanks, Natalie. Appreciate it. Yes. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you for sending that. Kimber, do you have any tips or tricks for organizing projects a bit better? Yes. When they make projects for our promoted jobs, it then gets messy for projects. Yes, yes. So I create a project for every single search that I'm a part of. I'm actually in the process of creating projects for like future pipeline building. So rather than waiting for a search to start, think about what are your like specific roles. Brandon, yes, the survey will be included in the follow-up, so you're good to go. Uh, but I would say too, if you're knowing that you're having like specific roles that you find every single year, right? Whether they're teachers or maybe they're senior manager roles or whatever, I just create a senior manager pipeline project that I can revisit as kind of like foundation. And then I can always copy and paste those profiles into new projects that, you may need in the future. So that's something I'm kind of playing around with right now. Rather than just waiting for every search that starts to create a new project, I will try to actually create a pipeline project that I might not have a role for yet, but then I'll copy and paste them for future roles because I know I'm going to likely do them. So it's personal preference, honestly, in terms of how you organize your projects. I will say, Brandon, it was great seeing you too. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Marcel. Thanks, Unique. I will say with projects, just make sure you're consistent in how you name them, right? That will not only help your organization, but help your colleagues to find different projects as well. What level of customization do you do with your messaging? I mean, I'll notice like where they work, right? So I'll say like, hey, I noticed that you were a director at Apple, or you were a director at Agility. Like I want to name something that I saw because I think one, that's just like a nice message to receive rather than some like more generic general message. But I'll highlight something specific skill or specific timeline. Like I noticed you were at Uncommon Schools for 3 years. And that's like directly aligned to the role that I'm just about to send you. Like just highlighting different pieces of their career, I think is really helpful. Yeah, copy and pasting. I get stuck in that sometimes. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes yeah, it's as easy as that, just like highlighting a specific skill because I think sometimes when you're like highlighting a specific job title or organization, that's something that you can actually customize where it like does that in a mass message where you can say like, "Hey, I noticed your experience at organization name." Like even that's maybe not as customizable as we want to be anymore. So like sometimes I'll just say like, "Hey, I saw you were, a middle school math teacher, and you were working on curriculum development. Like that is exactly what we need for this role. Here's the job link, right?" So that's great. One question I think I missed, Morel, if you're still on the call, in what ways do you differentiate a discovery call from a phone screen if the candidate moves forward? So in my mind, a discovery call is very much just like an informal chat. Um, that is just like learning more about the role, telling them about process. The phone screen itself, that's more formal, right? Like that is a prepared set of questions that you have that are probably based on your job description and your competencies and your rubric, right? So that's very much more formal. That happens later in the process, right? At least initially, that discovery cultivation call, that's like early on in the process, just to like make sure they're aligned with salary and answer their questions and tell them about process and timeline and things like that. Can I connect to discovery call? Are you saying Rebecca like doing it at the same time? So in my mind, like the discovery call is sometimes internal. That's like with your internal staff to like understand the job better. And then like I call it a cultivation call with the candidate early on. Sometimes you could combine those. I will say more often than not, early on, candidates want to just have an informal time to chat. Yeah, or separate times, but is there excuse me. No, I don't think there's any conflict. I think just because um like I think sometimes as a candidate, like I want to have a very informal call at the beginning, just again to align about process, align about timeline, and then I'm in a better mindset later on than if I do an actual phone screen later on. Um, like I think of those as two separate calls, but I want to make sure I'm answering your question. Can I conduct a discovery call if I'm also conducting it? Yeah, I think so. I think you can definitely do that because they're going to be early, they're going to be sometimes candidates who join 4 weeks after the job posting was probably posted. So you're going to have candidates at different stages, right? With some candidates, you're going to have them further down the line where you're ready to do the phone screens. But for those early candidates, a cultivation call first might be more appropriate. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks again, everyone. Again, this is my second time doing this. I hope to do more in the future. And then definitely also, if you have ideas around like what other types of webinars around these different types of topics that you might be curious about too, feel free to email me as well. I'm more than happy to connect. Krista, thank you. Leslie, thank you. Helen, thank you. I appreciate all your participation as well. Rebecca, thank you. And then, yeah, connect with me if you have any questions, moving forward, and we'd be more than happy to connect with you. Christine, thanks for being here. Any last step? Joanna, am I forgetting anything?
Just want to remind everyone, tomorrow we'll send out an email with the recording of this webinar. Feel free to share it with any colleagues or contacts that also might be interested in this content. We will share the survey link in that email and a few other resources that might be helpful that our staff here at Agility have produced for folks like you. So thank you so much for joining. Any last minute questions? We have a few more minutes. We will stay on until the top of the hour. But thank you all for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Joanna. Yes, thank you many, many times. We appreciate you attending and listening to me chat a little bit. Thanks, Bree. Thanks, Stacy. Hope everyone has a good rest of their day.